The splash echoed through my backyard at 5:30 in the morning. I jolted awake, thinking maybe a deer had somehow gotten past my 6-foot privacy fence. But when I peered through my bedroom curtains, I couldn't believe what I saw. There was Linda Harrington, our HOA president, doing the backstroke in my brand new pool like she owned the place. She even had the audacity to wave at my security camera with a huge grin on her face. I threw on my robe and headed downstairs, but I didn't go outside. Not yet. Instead, I made a quick detour to my garage, where I kept emergency supplies, including several 20-pound bags of ice I'd bought for a party last weekend. As I dragged bag after bag toward the back door, I pulled out my phone with my free hand and dialed 911. 3 months earlier, I'd finally completed the backyard renovation I'd been dreaming about for years. My property in Maplewood Estates sat on a generous half-acre lot, and I'd transformed the space into my personal paradise. The centerpiece was a gorgeous saltwater pool with a waterfall feature and underwater lighting that made the water glow like liquid sapphire at night. I'd also installed a hot tub, an outdoor kitchen, and a covered pavilion with a 70-inch TV. The very first thing I did after construction was put up no trespassing signs on every side of my property. The signs were large, reflective, and impossible to miss. I also made sure my fence was secure with a locked gate that required a code to open. This wasn't just about privacy, it was about liability. The last thing I needed was someone getting hurt on my property and suing me. But Linda had been a problem from day one. As HOA president, she seemed to think her title gave her special privileges to everyone's property. She'd shown up during construction multiple times, clipboard in hand, measuring distances from property lines and checking permit numbers. Each time, I'd politely but firmly asked her to leave. Her comments about the pool started innocently enough. She'd say things like, "What a beautiful addition to the neighborhood, and it must be so refreshing on hot days." But then her remarks took a strange turn. She started suggesting that such a luxurious amenity should be available to all HOA members, especially since we all paid dues. I reminded her that HOA dues covered common areas and neighborhood maintenance, not access to private property. The situation escalated when she began sending me official HOA letters about pool inspections and safety compliance checks. I consulted with my lawyer, who confirmed what I already knew. The HOA had zero authority over my backyard pool as long as I'd obtained proper permits and followed city codes, which I had. After her third attempt to schedule an inspection, I decided to upgrade my security. I installed Ring cameras covering every angle of my backyard, motion sensors along the fence line, and even a smart lock on my gate that would alert my phone if anyone tried to tamper with it. The system wasn't cheap, but I figured it was worth it for peace of mind. For a few weeks, things seemed to calm down. Linda stopped mentioning the pool at HOA meetings, and I thought maybe she'd finally gotten the message. But my cameras told a different story. I started getting motion alerts at odd hours, always from the camera facing the back corner of my fence. When I reviewed the footage, I'd see Linda walking along my property line, sometimes stopping to peer through the slats in the fence. One video showed her actually testing the gate, jiggling the handle, and examining the lock mechanism. Another caught her taking photos of my backyard from the small gap where the fence met my neighbor's property. I saved every single video, building a file of evidence I hoped I'd never need to use. Then came that morning in July, when the temperature had been hovering around 95 degrees for a week straight. I'd been running my pool pump extra to keep the water circulating and cool. Apparently, Linda had been watching and planning. When I found her in my pool, she wasn't even wearing a regular bathing suit. She had on what looked like pajama shorts and a tank top, as if she'd made a spontaneous middle-of-the-night decision to go for a swim. The security footage later revealed the full story. She'd shown up at 4:45 in the morning carrying a small stepladder. She'd propped it against my fence, climbed over, and made her way to the pool like she'd done it a dozen times before. Standing at my back door with the ice bags, I watched her for a moment. She was floating on her back, eyes closed, completely oblivious to the fact that I was awake and watching. Part of me wanted to storm out there and demand she leave immediately. But a better idea formed in my mind. I quietly opened the back door and started dragging the ice bags to the pool's edge. The first splash of ice hitting the water made Linda's eyes snap open. She sputtered and stood up in the shallow end, water streaming from her soaked clothes. Before she could say a word, I dumped the second bag. Then the third. By the fourth bag, she was shivering and scrambling toward the pool steps. Her face went from relaxed to panicked to furious in the span of 30 seconds. She climbed out of the pool with as much dignity as she could muster, which wasn't much, considering she was dripping wet and shaking from the cold. Her voice came out in stutters between chattering teeth as she tried to explain herself. She said she couldn't sleep because of the heat and just needed a quick dip to cool off. She claimed that as HOA president she had emergency access rights to all properties. She even suggested that I should be grateful she was personally testing my pool's safety features. I didn't respond to any of her ridiculous excuses. I just held up my phone, showing her that I was on an active call with 911. The color drained from her already pale face. She started backing toward the fence, saying this was all a misunderstanding and that she'd be happy to discuss it at the next HOA meeting. I told her she'd need to wait for the police to arrive. Running now would only make things worse. She tried to argue, but another shiver ran through her body and she wrapped her arms around herself instead. I went inside and grabbed a towel. Not out of kindness, but because I didn't want her claiming I'd endangered her health by making her stand there freezing. The police arrived within 10 minutes. Officers Davidson and Patel looked like they were trying hard not to laugh as they took in the scene. A soaking wet woman in pajamas standing next to a pool full of ice cubes at 6 o'clock in the morning was probably not their usual call. I invited them inside to review the security footage on my laptop. We watched Linda's break-in from multiple angles. The stepladder, the fence climbing, the unauthorized swim. Everything was captured in high-definition video. Officer Davidson shook his head and muttered something about HOA presidents thinking they're above the law. They went back outside to speak with Linda, who had wrapped herself in the towel and was sitting on one of my patio chairs. I could hear her voice rising as she tried to explain her position of authority and her concerns about pool safety. The officers weren't buying it. Officer Patel came back to get my statement while Officer Davidson continued questioning Linda. I explained the months of harassment, the attempted inspections, and the previous incidents I'd caught on camera. I showed him the file I'd been keeping with all the videos and correspondence. He took notes and said I had grounds for both criminal trespassing charges and a restraining order. When I mentioned I wanted to press charges, Linda must have overheard because she jumped up from the chair and started yelling about how I was overreacting and destroying community harmony. Officer Davidson had to calm her down and explained that climbing someone's fence to use their pool without permission was indeed criminal trespassing, regardless of her position in the HOA. They cited her on the spot. The ticket included criminal trespassing and potential vandalism charges, since she'd admitted to tampering with my gate on previous occasions. Linda's face went through several shades of red and purple as she realized the seriousness of her situation. Before leaving, the officers advised me to file for a restraining order immediately and to notify the HOA board about the incident. They also suggested I might want to consider adding barbed wire or anti-limb spikes to my fence, though they said it half-jokingly. I spent the rest of the morning filing the necessary paperwork online and drafting an email to the HOA board. I attached several of the most damning video clips, including Linda's pool invasion and her previous attempts to breach my property. I copied my lawyer on the email for good measure. By noon, my phone was blowing up with calls from board members. They were mortified and apologetic, assuring me that Linda's actions didn't represent the HOA's position. Several mentioned they'd had their own issues with her overstepping boundaries, but nothing to this extreme. An emergency board meeting was scheduled for that evening. News travels fast in Maplewood Estates, and by the time the meeting started, the community clubhouse was packed. Residents who normally skipped HOA meetings had shown up to witness the drama firsthand. Linda sat at the board table, still in her role as president, though she looked decidedly less confident than usual. Her hair was dry but frazzled, and dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't gotten any sleep after our morning encounter. She tried to call the meeting to order, but board member Robert Chan interrupted, saying they needed to address the elephant in the room first. I was invited to share my side of the story. I connected my laptop to the projector and played the security footage for everyone to see. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as residents watched their HOA president scaling my fence like a cat burglar. When the video showed her splashing in my pool at dawn, someone in the back actually laughed out loud. Linda tried to defend herself, bringing up pool safety concerns and her duties as president, but her arguments fell flat. Board member Patricia Rodriguez pointed out that Linda had no authority to enter private property without permission. regardless of her position. She added that Linda's actions had exposed the HOA to potential legal liability. The board called for an immediate vote of no confidence. The vote was unanimous. Even Linda's usual supporters turned against her. She was removed from her position as president effective immediately and banned from serving on the board in any capacity. But the consequences didn't stop there. Word of Linda's arrest and removal from the board spread beyond Maplewood Estates. It turned out she worked as a real estate agent for Grandview Realty, and her boss wasn't pleased when clients started asking if she was the agent who broke into someone's pool. Within 2 weeks, her face disappeared from the company website and from her for sale signs around the neighborhood. The legal ramifications were even more severe. At her court hearing, Linda faced criminal trespassing charges that carried potential jail time and substantial fines. Her lawyer tried to argue for dismissal based on her previously clean record and standing in the community, but the judge wasn't sympathetic. The video evidence was undeniable, and my documentation of her pattern of harassment made it worse. The judge found her guilty of criminal trespassing and sentenced her to 90 days in jail, suspended to time served, plus 2 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay $5,000 in fines and stay at least 100 feet away from my property at all times. The restraining order was granted for 3 years. When the judge read the sentence, Linda's jaw dropped, and she started crying right there in the